Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be showing you how to crimp Cat5e and Cat6 Ethernet cables yourself. It's actually super simple, and with just a bit of practice you'll get it down super quickly. So to start, you're going to need a couple of tools. Obviously you're going to need your crimper. I recommend getting something middle of the road. Don't go for your cheapest one, but you don't necessarily need to buy the most expensive one either. This is a pretty nice heavy duty easy crimp. It also has the blade on the end which will cut through your pass-through RJ45s, which I will be demonstrating as well. Then I've also got a cable stripper. This is a pretty cool one. You basically just put the cable into that end and then twist it round and it strips off the insulation. I much prefer just using a blade and doing it by hand. It's just how I've practiced it and it's my preferred method, but either which way works just fine. Then the next tools that I have are side cutters. This one I use for mostly cutting through thicker cables, and then the smaller side cutters are the ones that I'm actually going to trim down the terminals inside the cable with. And when crimping, and I'll explain that later, you need to get your terminals cut extremely straight so that they fit into the RJ45 properly. So having a small flush cutter like this one, some people call it a flush cutter, some people call it a side cutter. I'm sure there's many more names. You want a small one like this because it gives you a lot more control. When you're trying to cut through terminals with a big one like this, it can be quite difficult to line it up straight and to get a perfect cut every time. Okay, so, and then the last tool I've got is just a cable tester. It's very simple. You plug in your one RJ45 into this end, your other end into this end, and then you turn the cable tester on, and then you'll see later on in the video, each one of the terminals inside the cable get tested and the light will go on. If it's working, if it's not working, the light won't show. And in a future video which I am working on, I'll actually show you how to do grounded Ethernet cables and for shielded cables, and then the ground light will come on. Okay, so let's jump into it. So I'm just going to move this stuff out the way that we don't need it. I've got my RJ45s over here. I don't actually have normal RJ45s, I've only got shielded ones, but they work in the exact same way as a normal unshielded RJ45, and we're not working with shielded cables, so it really won't make much of a difference here. So I'm going to bring over my Cat5e. Okay, so for some reason my camera decided to stop recording, so what I was actually going to just do, I'm just going to do this again. What you want to do is you want to strip off a little bit of your insulation and then pull it back a bit and expose your cables. Okay, so here's your ripcord. Cut that off, and then we just want to put our cables into a star pattern. Now some people use the insulation that they just stripped off to untwist the cables, and this does work well. It's quite quick, it's quite fast. What I do, and what I've just been doing over the years, is just use my fingers. It's quick, it's easy, and it's pretty simple. I guess having done this for quite a while, my fingers may have built up a bit of a resistance, but yeah, that's what I do. But feel free to do it any which way you like. If you're doing lots of cables, you could also get a screwdriver and a glove, and you could just use the screwdriver to untwist it, and then you just want to straighten out your pairs like this. So the next thing that I do is start putting the cables in the correct order. So there's two standards. The one is T568A and T568B, and these standards basically guide you on which order and sequence to put the wires in. So because we're going to be using B, we're going to start with white orange, and then orange, white green, and then blue, white blue, and then green, white brown, and then brown. And we're going to start from the left and work our way to the right in that particular order. So I'm just busy putting the cables together, and I'm going to do a little bit of a wiggle here just to get them really nice and straight. You want these cables to be as absolutely straight as possible, so that when they go into the RJ45 they can slide into the tracks properly and there's no twisting or anything weird going on. So once it's nice and straight, you're going to take your side cutters and you're going to cut the cables, and make sure to cut it extremely straight on the end. You want that to be as straight as possible. You don't want any ridges or uneven lengths on the cables there. And you're going to leave just enough to fit into the RJ45 properly. and to also have enough space for the cable to get crimped down properly inside the RJ45. The one way you can measure this up properly is to line it up with the RJ45 before you cut it. I just do it by feel now. I know pretty much exactly where to cut it after doing it for so long, so I'm just going to freehand it, but you can use the RJ45 to line it up properly. So you basically just want to visually inspect your RJ45. You want to make sure that your cable's insulation is inside the RJ45 and that your terminals are sitting flush with the end of the RJ45. So you basically want to look to make sure that you can see the copper ends pushing all the way up to the edge of the RJ45. Then what you want to do is bring your crimper over. You want to slide the RJ45 into the correct spot, and then you just want to crimp down. Now visually inspect your RJ45. Make sure that at the bottom, at the end of the RJ45, you've got your terminals pushing up right against the RJ45. The next thing that you want to look for is that your pins that push down on the cable are all level. So you basically want none of these points want to be, you don't want any of these points to be higher up or lower down than one another. You want these to be exactly pushed down at equal height. Okay, now after you've done that, you just slide on your boot, and your boot should, well, this one does actually have little ridges inside of it that clip into the RJ45 on the outside. So you can just slide it on like this, pop it on there, and now you've got a terminated end. So I've already done this other end. I did this one a while back, didn't put on a boot, but you get the idea. So now what you can do is you can run your cable tester. So I'm going to take my cable tester here. I'm going to plug in one end to the cable tester. I'm going to plug in the other end to the other end of the cable tester, and I'm just going to run on the slow mode. Okay, so this part's actually upside down, but you see that each cable is being tested. So each cable inside your Ethernet cable is being tested, and as long as the light comes on, you're good. If for some reason, and I'll actually show this to you quick, let me turn this off. I mean, all cable testers are kind of, you might get a different cable tester, you might not have the exact same cable tester as me. But if I go and cut this, and I cut through, okay, I just cut through green. If I run this cable tester again, and get my other end, run this cable tester, now we should see that at least one of the cables are no longer on. There we go. So we're missing our sixth cable here, and you can easily tell that by using a cable tester. So instead of playing guesswork, rather just get a cable tester. It makes your life a lot easier. Obviously, sometimes these cable testers aren't 100% accurate, so you might be in a case where it's reading just fine, but you may have a poor connection in your RJ45 or something like that, and your cable tester says it's fine, but when you actually use the cable, you may be experiencing some issues. Anyway, so that's Cat5, and that's how to test it. Now, there is one more thing I want to show you, and that is how to use a pass-through RJ45. So a pass-through RJ45, also sometimes referred to as an easy RJ45, is basically the same thing, except that the RJ45 terminals can pass right through it, making your crimping a lot easier. Now, I don't like to use these. Personally, I much prefer the standard crimps, the standard RJ45s, but that's just me. I have my reasons. So if you are using these, and if you're new to crimping, this can make your life a lot easier. But just bear in mind that if you do use these, you have to have a crimper that has the blade on the end. Otherwise, it's going to crimp, but your cables aren't going to get cut off at the end. Now, you could use a flush cutter like this, but it is difficult, and the clip of the RJ45 does kind of go over a bit, and it does make it quite difficult to get in there without actually cutting into your RJ45. So I don't really recommend doing that. So we're just going to do is standard crimp, like we've done before. Cut off the ripcord, untwist your pairs. You can either use your insulation, whoops, you can either use the insulation like this, or you can just go at it with your hand. Okay, so I'm just going to do this real fast. Okay, so now that I've got my things lined up, I've got my connectors lined up, and I've got them in the correct order, I'm going to just cut them off a bit, cut them a little bit, so that it's easier to work with. Get my easy RJ45, and just, or pass-through RJ45, I think is the technical term, and just slide it through. Now you'll see that the cables are actually coming through the end. And that's what makes it a pass-through RJ45. So now, just make sure your order is correct. Get your crimper, slide it in, and crimp it down. And you'll see that the blade actually cuts through the cables. And that's it. That's a easy RJ45 crimped. Trying to get my camera to focus. Hello. Focus. There we go. So yeah, that's how you do that. And we can test this again just to make sure that it's working. They do function like regular RJ45s. That they do. So let's plug it in. And we'll test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Alright, that's working fine. Cool. So that's Cat5e. Cat6 is the exact same. It's just faster. And there are a couple of different RJ45s that you can do and that you can use. Sorry, camera was out of focus there. There's a couple of different RJ45s and things that you can use. So with Cat6, I'm going to strip it for you quickly just so that you can see inside. Immediately you should notice that it's a thicker cable, and that's because it's got this separator in the middle. Okay, so this is how the Cat6, this is one of the ways that Cat6 is faster. It separates the twisted pairs. So there's no interference between the pairs, or very little interference between the pairs. Okay, so the way you get rid of this is cut each of the little wings as close to the terminals as you can without actually cutting into the terminals. I know it's a really short piece, it's the only one I could find. There we go. And once you've done that, just twist the separator and then it should come right off. Now I do it like that because if you cut it flush like this, if you try and cut it like that, you can never really get it all the way into the cable. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to untwist our pairs. It's very simple. And we'll put them into the T56-8B standard position, or sequence, I should say. Okay, so here we go. Green, blue, white, blue, green, and white, brown, brown. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing that we did with the Cat5e. We're just going to, squash them down a bit and put them into the right position. Now, there are, like I mentioned, there's a couple of different RJ45s that you can get for Cat6. Now, some of them will have a channel that separates these cables apart built in, and some of them come with a loading bar. Now, a loading bar is a small piece of plastic that basically separates the terminals a little bit. So you'll see that there's a flat side and there's an indented side. The indented side is the one that's going to go over the cables, and you just want to wiggle this into position. There we go. Make sure that your cables are still in the right order. Okay, so once you've done that, you're going to want to flush cut this as close to it as possible. Now, the thing with Cat6 is, in order for it to actually be Cat6 compliant, you can't have the twisted pairs inside the RJ45 be longer than 4.7 millimeters or 3/16 of an inch. So you want to insert this, and you want the terminals to be super close. You want these to be extremely close, so close as you possibly can get them. And then you just crimp it down, and that's the job done. And that's terminating a Cat6 cable. So if you don't have the load bar, typically your RJ45 will have the separations built into it. So there's a couple of different types. They all basically do the same thing. It's just different manufacturers have different ways, and yada yada yada. So yeah, that's pretty much how it's done. I am going to make another video very shortly on how to do shielded Cat5, and in that video I'm going to show you how to ground your Ethernet cable to your RJ45, which is very important for certain applications, including PoE, and that should be coming up on the channel pretty soon. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you found it helpful, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and leave any questions or suggestions in the comments below.